Leaders of the opposition Syrian National Council met in Turkey today with that country's foreign minister. The council's leader has called for opening a military bureau in Turkey to coordinate the resistance. Once a close ally and trading partner of Damascus, Ankara has taken a tougher and tougher public stance against the Assad regime. Syrian officials can no longer enter Turkey. All transactions with Syria's central bank have been cut off, and there are some 10,000 refugees along the two countries' 500-mile border. For more, we turn to Turkey's ambassador to Washington, Namik Tan. Ambassador, welcome. The Syrian army has entered homes. There are reports of widespread arrests, even executions right on the street. Has your government made a formal reaction to Syria?
Well, thank you, first of all, giving me this opportunity to express our views and thoughts on a very, very serious issue. Actually, yes, from the very beginning, we had a principled stance on Syria. Syria has lost its chances to carry on the once, I think, a very meaningful relationship with Turkey. Why? Because it turned a blind eye to the demands of its own people. We are for the people of Syria. Turkey has, from the very beginning, I think, shown a very strong reaction to the killings, to the atrocities, to the shelling of the cities, to the humanitarian disaster that has been caused by I think, irreasonable acts of the Syrian administration. And for the time being, we have had no change in our position. It's, I think, it is a responsibility for us as I think, one of the most important neighbors of Syria to try to protect the civilians.
Is it Turkey's position now that there can be no future for Syria with Bashar al-Assad in charge?
Well, I think it is almost over, I can say, because Syrian administration, from the very beginning, really we could not understand why they did this, but they were quite reluctant to listen to what we asked them to do.
There are some suggestions in tonight's reports on our program that this is like another Grozny, perhaps another Srebrenica. Is it now a humanitarian disaster on that scale, in your view?
Well, well, I haven't been to the ground, so I don't know the conditions there, but from the reportings and from the reports that we receive from our sources in the region, I mean, the situation is very, very difficult, and I think it is it can well be described as a disaster.
Last night on our program, one of the leaders of the Syrian National Council from Istanbul called for international help and called for weapons. Is Turkey willing to help arm the Syrian resistance?
Look, I think some of the things are easier said than done. Of course, I know the first thing that we want to do is to protect the civilians. The humanitarian efforts are much more important than anything else at this moment. Military involvement is not in our agenda for the time being.
Are you afraid of a humanitarian crisis spilling over into your country if people try to leave Syria?
Well, actually, we are hosting around 10,000 Syrians in our country, in the adjacent areas. Actually, it's my hometown, Antakya, and we will continue to host them as long as they need our help. That should be known. And we are able to just provide them the necessary needs. I think as much as we receive such demands, we will address them.
You say that military help is not on your agenda, but you also note that you're an important country in the region, a neighbor of Turkey, a rising power, a NATO member, one of the largest military forces in NATO. Isn't Turkey uniquely prepared more prepared than other neighbors of Syria to help out in this
Yes,
regard?
That's a good question. Look, I think the key word here is the legitimacy. Legitimacy is more important than anything else. What I mean by legitimacy, there are two aspects of the legitimacy. One is the internal aspect, the other one is the international aspect. The international aspect, of course, should be, I think, designed or engineered by the UN. We don't have any UN resolution from the UN Security Council. We failed, as you know. So we should also have a legitimacy, I think, domestically, which means I think there should be, I think, broad-based, full embracing, and I think powerful opposition, which covers every aspect of the people in Syria. So in both fronts, we have not gotten the required, I think, stage yet.
But if, as you say, the UN is stuck, unable to move, does that just leave the people of Syria to their suffering?
No, I think that's why we are trying to broaden the base of the international front. That's why we were, I think, we were critically involved, and we were very instrumental in putting up this so-called Syrian Friends of Syrian People group, and it had a very, very successful meeting in Tunisia, on the 24th of February. And I think that's one of the steps that we are building up. That's a platform that would create some legitimacy. That's what we are trying to do.
Syria, as you note, not only is a neighbor of Turkey, but also of Iraq, of Jordan, of Lebanon, of Israel. It is in a very, very tense spot in the neighborhood. Is an unstable Syria dangerous to everybody in the Eastern Mediterranean?
Absolutely. I cannot agree more. I mean, let's call it not dangerous, but I think it's dangerous for the stability and I think peace in the region, which we need most in that volatile region. Look at the region, I mean, very carefully. There are enormous challenges. I mean, you talked about Iraq. We have, as you said, the entire Middle East, the Arab Spring. So if you put them together, this, I think, crisis we don't need.
Ambassador Tan, thank you very much for joining us.
I thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Thank you so much.